My dog found my daughter I gave up 30 years ago. My dog Bella never liked strangers. For 3 years, she would growl at mail carriers, hide from children, and even greet my friends with suspicion. So when she broke free from my hands in downtown Portland and ran joyfully toward a young woman in the crowd, I was completely shocked. It was a Saturday morning in October. Rainy Portland had finally given residents a sunny day, and the streets were full of people hurrying about their business. I was walking down Washington Street with Bella on her leash, heading to the pet store for her favorite food. We had been making this walk every weekend for 3 years, ever since I adopted Bella from the shelter. Usually, she walked calmly beside me, occasionally stopping to sniff building corners or trees. Bella was a mix of Labrador and something else, medium-sized, with brown fur and intelligent brown eyes. The shelter staff had warned me that she was very cautious with people, apparently due to a difficult past. In 3 years, I had never seen her show interest in strangers, but that morning, something changed. We were passing a small cafe on the corner when Bella suddenly froze in the middle of the sidewalk. Her body tensed, ears perked up, tail raised. She began sniffing with such intensity, as if she had caught something incredibly important. I felt the leash tighten. Bella was pulling me forward with a force I had never noticed in her before. Her breathing quickened. She began whimpering quietly with excitement. In the next second, she jerked so suddenly that the leash slipped from my hands. Bella ran straight toward a group of people standing near the cafe entrance. Among them was a young woman with short, dark hair, dressed in a blue coat. She was talking on her phone, standing slightly apart from the others. I ran after the dog, shouting apologies, but Bella had already reached her target. She was literally jumping around the stranger, wagging her tail so intensely that her whole body swayed from side to side. The woman quickly ended her call and stepped back, clearly frightened by such an enthusiastic display of canine affection. I was incredibly embarrassed. Passers-by stopped and stared at us, some smiling at the dog's joy, others looking annoyed by the commotion. I grabbed the leash and tried to pull Bella away, continuously apologizing to the stranger. The woman was about 35, average height, with pleasant features and brown eyes. She was wearing jeans and comfortable sneakers, holding a leather bag and car keys. She looked confused and a little scared, but not angry. Bella categorically refused to leave her. Every time I tried to lead the dog away, she would plant her paws on the ground and whine. Then she would sit right at the woman's feet and look up at her with such adoration, as if she had found a long-lost friend. This was so uncharacteristic of my cautious dog that I didn't know what to think. The woman introduced herself as Emily Johnson. She was surprised by Bella's behavior, but handled the situation with understanding. When I explained that my dog usually fears strangers and never behaves this way, Emily looked thoughtfully at Bella. She suggested that the dog might be confusing her with someone, though she couldn't remember ever meeting this dog before. Emily tried to recall if any of her acquaintances had a similar dog, but nothing came to mind. I tried once more to lead Bella away, pulling the leash and giving stern commands. But she began whining so pitifully that passers-by started turning around. Some even stopped, thinking something was wrong with the dog. It was obvious that Bella wasn't going to leave this woman voluntarily. Emily looked at her watch and said she needed to go downtown, the same direction I was heading. She suggested we walk together, hoping the dog would calm down while moving. We began walking slowly down the street. Bella walked between us, constantly glancing at Emily and wagging her tail. From time to time, she would gently brush against the stranger's leg, which was completely incredible for a dog who usually kept her distance, even from my close friends. Trying to fill the awkward silence, I told Emily about Bella's story. I had adopted her from the city shelter 3 years ago when she was about 4 years old. The staff told me she had been found wandering the streets, malnourished and frightened. No one knew what had happened to her previous owners. At the shelter, Bella had trouble adapting for a long time. She would huddle in the corner of her cage and refuse to come out. She was extremely cautious with people, allowing herself to be petted, but never initiating contact. Shelter workers warned potential owners that she would need a lot of time and patience to learn to trust. It took me almost 6 months for Bella to start feeling at home. It took even longer for her to get used to guests. Even now, 3 years later, she was wary of new people and preferred to stay away when someone visited. Emily listened with interest. She said she worked as a social worker downtown and often dealt with difficult cases, children from troubled families, elderly people without support, people who had experienced trauma. Perhaps that's why she handled my dog's strange behavior so calmly and wasn't in a hurry to leave. Emily explained that in her work, she had seen many examples of how animals sense people's emotional states. Sometimes, therapy dogs in hospitals and nursing homes inexplicably choose those patients who need support the most. We reached the intersection at First Avenue, where our paths were supposed to diverge. I was heading to the pet store and Emily to her office. I thanked her for her patience and understanding, apologized once more for the disturbance, and tried to say goodbye. But as soon as Emily started walking away, Bella became agitated again. She pulled the leash in her direction with such force that I could barely keep my balance. The dog whined, looked at me with pleading eyes, then looked again at the departing Emily. Her behavior was so desperate that it seemed like she was losing her dearest friend. I was completely bewildered. In 3 years of living together, I had never seen Bella react this way to a stranger. Usually, she was suspicious even of my close friends whom she saw regularly. But here she was, acting as if she had found a kindred spirit. Emily stopped and turned toward us. Her face showed confusion mixed with curiosity. She clearly didn't understand what was happening, but at the same time didn't look irritated or eager to get rid of the persistent dog. I began frantically searching for an explanation for Bella's strange behavior. Maybe she had lived near Emily's house before ending up at the shelter, or knew someone from her neighborhood. I asked where Emily lived, hoping to find some connection. Emily named the Hawthorne district on the east side of the city. That was quite far from the place in North Portland where Bella had been found and brought to the shelter. It seemed unlikely that the dog could know Emily from there. I continued looking for a logical explanation. Maybe Bella knew someone from Emily's friends or colleagues? Dogs sometimes remember the scents of people connected to their previous owners and can recognize similar aromas of perfume, shampoo, or laundry detergent. Emily thoughtfully shook her head. She said she didn't have a dog and never had. Most of her friends and colleagues also didn't keep pets. Too much work, frequent business trips. She tried to remember if any of her acquaintances owned a dog similar to Bella, but nothing came to mind. Then Emily added almost casually that her childhood wasn't the kind where they could afford pets. Her parents couldn't allow themselves extra expenses, and they lived in rental housing where animals weren't allowed. Then she added quietly that she had actually spent some time in a children's home, ended up there very young, and barely remembered those early years. Those words hit me like lightning. Children's home. Suddenly, memories I had tried to keep deeply buried for 30 years surfaced in my mind, like someone had opened a rusty lock on an old chest, and all the painful images came flooding out. I felt my face go pale, a lump formed in my throat, and my hands began trembling. The world around me seemed to slow down. Street noise became muffled. Passerbys' faces blurred. I grabbed onto a lamppost to keep from falling. Emily immediately noticed my sudden change in condition. She came closer and asked with concern what was wrong, if I was okay. I looked like I had seen a ghost or received terrible news. Bella also sensed that something had changed. She stopped pulling the leash and sat next to me, whining quietly and nudging my hand with her nose. Dogs always sense their owner's emotional state, and Bella clearly understood that I was upset. I didn't know what to tell a stranger. How could I explain that her casually spoken words had awakened the most painful chapter of my life? How could I talk about what I had tried to forget for years, but what tormented me every day? But something in Emily's eyes, in her sincere care and professional habit of helping people in difficult situations, made me speak. Perhaps it was her experience working with traumatized people, or simply human compassion. But I felt I could trust her. I briefly told her that in my youth, I had to make the most difficult decision of my life, to place my daughter in a children's home. I was only 22 years old, alone with a 3-year-old child, without money, without work, without any support. The child's father had disappeared as soon as he learned about the pregnancy. The 90s were a harsh time, especially for single mothers. But the worst part was the debt. At first, these were small amounts I borrowed from acquaintances for food and rent for a room in a communal apartment. Then, when official channels closed, I turned to people who lent money at huge interest rates. The interest grew like a snowball, and soon the debt became insurmountable. When I stopped paying, real persecution began. These people came to our home, threatened, said they would take the child if I didn't find the money. I saw how my little girl would hide in the corner when these scary men knocked on the door. She began stuttering from fear, waking up at night screaming. I understood that I couldn't protect her. I had no money, no job, no relatives who could help. Every day I feared they would carry out their threats. She deserved better, safety, stability, a loving family that could give her what I couldn't. The decision to place my daughter in a children's home was incredibly difficult for me. I spent sleepless nights weighing all options, but there was no other way out. This happened in 1991, in October. She was 3 years and 2 months old. Emily listened without interrupting. Her face showed professional sympathy, but I noticed how she tensed when I mentioned the year. Something in her eyes changed, as if my words had touched some important chord. When I finished telling about the situation I was in, Emily was silent for several seconds. Then she slowly said that she too had ended up in a children's home in 1991. Times were indeed difficult then. Many families couldn't cope with hardships. She was brought there when she was 3 years old, in early fall. The world around me began spinning. I felt my legs become weak, and my heart began beating so hard it seemed audible throughout the street. Bella stood up and came closer to me, as if sensing I needed support. With a trembling voice, I asked which specific children's home she had been taken to. Emily thought for a second, then answered, Hope, on Marshall Street. It was one of the largest in the city. Children from all over Portland and surrounding areas ended up there. My legs finally gave out. I grabbed the lamppost with both hands to keep from falling right onto the sidewalk. This was the very same children's home. The same one where I had taken my little girl 30 years ago. Memories of that day rushed back with such force that I almost lost consciousness. I remembered every detail. How I packed her little suitcase, folding the most necessary things. How she asked why we were going to see Aunt. And I didn't know what to answer. How she clung to my skirt when we approached the children's home building. I remembered the face of the social worker, a stern woman about 50 who filled out documents. I remembered how she cried when she realized I was leaving her. I remembered her scream, Mommy, don't go. Those words still haunted me in nightmares. I couldn't say a word. Emily looked at me with growing anxiety, not understanding what had caused such a violent reaction in me. Bella sat between us, shifting her gaze from one to the other, as if understanding the importance of the moment. Finally, I managed to make myself speak. With a trembling voice, I asked what her name was before adoption. Emily turned pale. She was clearly beginning to suspect something, and after a long pause, barely audibly said, Sophia. Her name was Sophia Anderson. Anderson was my maiden name. I had changed it to my second husband's surname after an unsuccessful marriage at 30, which also fell apart after a few years, and I never had more children. But in the children's home documents, the child was recorded under my maiden name. We stood in the middle of the sidewalk, looking at each other, and the world around us seemed to stop. Pedestrians walked around us. Cars drove by. Street music was playing somewhere. But we heard nothing except our own heartbeats. Sophia, my little girl whom I had lost 30 years ago was standing in front of me. Adult, beautiful, successful woman, but with the same brown eyes, the same lip shape, the same stubborn chin. Now I saw what I hadn't noticed before. The mole above her left eyebrow, exactly like 3-year-old Sophia's. The special shape of her ears, the way she tilted her head when thinking. All of this was painfully familiar. But 30 years later, I couldn't believe my eyes. I don't remember who cried first. I only remember that the next second, we were hugging right on the street, sobbing like children. 30 years of pain, longing, guilt, and hopelessness poured out in those tears. Bella jumped around us, barking joyfully, as if understanding that her mission was finally accomplished. Passers-by stopped. Some asked if we needed help, but we couldn't answer. We just held each other, afraid to let go, afraid this was just a dream, that in a second I would wake up in my empty apartment with pain in my heart. Emily pulled away first. Her face was wet with tears, eyes red and swollen. She looked at me as if seeing a ghost from the past. Her lips moved, but there was no sound. Finally, she whispered that this was impossible, that this couldn't be true, that this was some kind of mistake. But the evidence was there. Besides the physical resemblance, all the facts matched: age, date of placement in the children's home, name, even the maiden name. I told her about the scar on her chin from falling off swings when she was 2. Emily automatically touched the small scar that was barely visible, but still distinguishable. We found the nearest bench in a small park and sat down. I needed to collect my thoughts, and Emily was clearly in shock. Bella lay at our feet, resting her head on her paws, and watched us attentively, as if guarding this incredible meeting. I began telling her everything in detail, about how I met her father in college, how he disappeared when he learned about the pregnancy, about the difficulties of a young mother in the early 90s when the entire social support system was crumbling, about how I tried to find work while caring for a small child, and how I gradually fell into debt. I told her about those terrible people who threatened us, about how they described what they would do to the child if I didn't find money, about sleepless nights when I sat with a knife at the door, fearing they would break in and take her. The hardest part was telling about the day of separation itself, how I explained to 3-year-old Sophia that Mommy couldn't protect her anymore, that there were good people who would take better care of her, how she didn't understand, clung to me, begged me not to leave her. I told her how every day for the last 30 years I thought about her, wondering if she was alive, healthy, happy, how I imagined what she had become, what profession she chose, whether she had a family, how I blamed myself for not being able to find another way out. Emily listened silently, occasionally wiping away tears. Sometimes she shook her head in disbelief, sometimes asked clarifying questions about details that only a mother could remember. When I described her favorite stuffed rabbit with a pink bow, she sobbed and said that rabbit still lay at her home on a shelf in the bedroom. Then it was her turn to tell. Emily had spent only 6 months at Hope Children's Home. She was adopted quite quickly by James and Margaret Johnson, a history teacher and a nurse who had been unable to have children for a long time. They were kind, patient people who surrounded her with love and care. Emily said the first months in the new family were difficult. She was withdrawn, often cried, searched for her real mommy. But gradually, James and Margaret were able to win her trust. They never hid that she was adopted, but made her understand they loved her like their own daughter. In the Johnson family, Emily received everything I couldn't give her: stability, safety, good education. They lived in a cozy suburban house. She had her own room, lots of toys and books. Later, they adopted another child, a boy named Michael, who became her younger brother. Emily graduated from school with honors, received a scholarship to the University of Oregon, where she studied social work. She said she chose this profession because she had gone through the foster care system herself and wanted to help children like she once was. After university, she worked with teenagers from troubled families for several years, then moved to the department working with elderly people. 3 years ago, she married David Carter, a pediatrician from the Children's Hospital. They have 2 children, 7-year-old Alexander and 4-year-old Lily. Listening to her story, I understood that I had made the right decision 30 years ago. My Sophia had grown up in a loving family, received excellent education, built a successful career. She had her own family, children, a stable life. If I had kept her then in that situation, who knows what would have happened to her? But emotions were stronger than logic. I saw my child in front of me, whom I had lost 30 years ago, and wanted to hug her without letting go. I wanted to hear all the details of her life, learn about every day we had spent apart. Emily spoke calmly, But I could see she was also emotional. She kept glancing at her watch, clearly thinking about needing to be at work, that her family was waiting for her. This meeting had turned her world upside down just as much as mine. When she finished telling about her life, silence hung between us. We sat next to each other, but each was immersed in her own thoughts. I thought about how many years were lost, how many important moments I had missed. First day of school, graduation, wedding, birth of grandchildren. All of this had passed me by. Emily was probably thinking about how this meeting would change her life. She had parents who raised her and whom she loved. She had a husband and children who knew her as Emily Carter. And suddenly a biological mother appeared with a painful past and feelings of guilt, wanting to restore connection. Finally, Emily broke the silence. She said she needed time to think it all through. This was too much information, too many emotions for one day. She had to talk to her husband, to her adoptive parents. This decision would affect her entire family. I understood her condition. But when she stood up from the bench, my heart sank. What if she decided it was better to leave the past in the past? What if this meeting would be the last? Emily began walking away quickly, clearly trying to escape the overwhelming emotions. I sat on the bench, not knowing what to do. Stop her? Let her go? Ask for a meeting? Insist on contact? But Bella decided for me. She jumped up and ran after Emily. Catching up to her on the path, the dog began gently touching her leg with her paw as she walked, quietly whining, rubbing against her legs, making her slow down. Emily tried to keep walking, gently pushing the dog away with her hand. But Bella didn't give up. She ran ahead of Emily and sat right on the path, blocking the way. When Emily tried to go around, the dog ran ahead again and sat down again. Bella looked up at Emily, whining quietly and gazing into her eyes. There was something human in her gaze, almost pleading, as if she understood the importance of the moment and didn't want to let these two lose each other again. Finally, Emily stopped. She looked at Bella, then at me, still sitting on the distant bench. Her shoulders dropped, and I saw her slowly return and sit next to me. Bella immediately came over and put her paw on Emily's knee. Emily automatically began stroking the dog's head, and I noticed her breathing became calmer. Emily whispered that the dog knew. Somehow she knew we were connected. How was this possible? How could an animal sense family bonds between people? We started talking again, more calmly this time. Emily asked me to tell her about that time when she was little, about what she was like, what she loved, what she feared, how she spent her days. She said she remembered so little from early childhood, only fragmentary images and sensations. And I told her about how Sophia loved her stuffed rabbit with a pink bow, whom she called Bunny, how she was afraid of thunderstorms and during rain would hide under blankets with her toys, how she laughed when I read her bedtime stories, especially about the Three Little Pigs. I told how she loved drawing scribbles with colored pencils and hanging her masterpieces all around our little room, how she called me not just Mama, but Mommy, and hugged so tight I couldn't breathe. Emily cried listening to these stories. She said some details seemed familiar, like a distant dream. She really remembered the stuffed rabbit. It was the only toy she was allowed to take from the children's home to her new family. She said she was still afraid of thunderstorms, though she didn't understand why. And that she loved to draw. It became her hobby, though professionally she did something completely different. These small childhood details it turned out, had shaped her preferences for life. We talked until evening. Emily told me more about her children. Alexander was a serious boy, very much like his father, loved reading and building model airplanes. Lily was more lively, loved dancing and drawing, dreamed of becoming a princess or a veterinarian. She showed me photos on her phone. Alexander really was a serious child with attentive eyes. Lily turned out to be a copy of Emily as a child. The same brown eyes, the same mischievous smile, the same unruly curls. Emily's husband, David, looked like a kind, reliable man. In the photos, he often hugged his wife and children, and you could see this was a happy, strong family. Emily said he had been working at the Children's Hospital for 10 years. Loved his job and was very patient with children. I told her about my life after I gave her up. The first years were the hardest. I barely got out of debt, worked 2 jobs, rented corners in different neighborhoods. For a long time, I couldn't forgive myself for that decision, though I understood there was no other way out. Gradually, life got better. I completed accounting courses, found stable work at a small company. I bought a small apartment, made a few friends. But my personal life never worked out. I couldn't forget my lost daughter and build a relationship with another man. Several times I tried to find information about Sophia through social services, but they explained it was impossible without the child's consent. And when she became an adult, she would have to initiate the search herself if she wanted to. I waited for that call for 18 years. Every day, I hoped the phone would ring and an unfamiliar voice would say, "This is Sophia. I'm your daughter." But the call never came. Gradually, I began thinking she didn't want to look for me, that she lived better without reminders of the painful past. 3 years ago, when I turned 50, I decided to get a dog. Loneliness had become especially difficult, and work didn't fill my entire life. At the shelter, they showed me several dogs, but Bella immediately caught my attention. She sat in the corner of her cage, wary and sad. A staff member told me her story. Found on the street, malnourished and frightened. Previous owners unknown. Maybe she was abandoned, maybe she got lost. Bella couldn't adapt to shelter life for a long time, was afraid of people and other dogs. Something in her eyes reminded me of myself 30 years ago. Lost, frightened, not knowing what to expect from life. I understood we needed each other. Bella would become my companion, and I would give her a home and safety. The first months were difficult. Bella would huddle in corners, flinch at sudden sounds, wouldn't let herself be petted. But gradually, she began trusting me. First, she started eating from my hands, then let herself be petted, then began sleeping on a mat next to my bed. Now Bella was my best friend. She would meet me from work, walk with me in the evenings, lie next to me when I was sad. We understood each other without words, and here she had led me to Sophia. When it started getting dark, Emily said she really needed to go home to her family. Her husband would worry. The children were waiting for dinner, but now she wasn't running away from me. We exchanged phone numbers and email addresses. Emily explained she needed time to process everything that had happened, to talk to her husband, to her adoptive parents, possibly to a psychologist. This decision would affect her entire family, and she couldn't make it alone. She promised to write me within a week, when she was ready for the next meeting. We agreed to meet in the same park. On the same bench. This place had now become special for us. I understood her position. 30 years later, you can't just take and return to mother-daughter relationships. Too much water had passed under the bridge. Too many people were involved in this story. She had her own family, her own obligations, her own life. But hope lived in my heart. Bella felt it. All the way home, she wagged her tail and occasionally looked at me as if proud of herself. She had completed her mission, led me to the person I had been looking for 30 years. At home, I took out an old box from the closet. It contained Sophia's childhood things, the few I had kept as memories. A little flowered dress she loved to wear, tiny red shoes, scribbled drawings, a few photographs. Bella sniffed the box with great interest. Now, I was beginning to understand why she had reacted to Emily that way. All these years, the dog had sensed the smell of these things in the house. A smell soaked with my tears and memories, my pain and love. And when Bella met Emily, something in her scent seemed familiar. Maybe it was common genes creating a similar natural aroma. Maybe the influence of that childhood clothing Emily wore at the children's home. Or maybe Bella simply sensed my emotional connection to this woman on some deep level, inaccessible to human understanding. The week dragged endlessly. I couldn't concentrate at work, constantly checked my phone and email. I slept poorly, tossed in bed, replaying our meeting in my head. What if Emily changed her mind? What if she decided it was better to leave the past in the past? Bella sensed my anxiety. She wouldn't leave my side, put her head on my lap when I sat on the couch, watched with attentive eyes as if trying to calm me. Sometimes it seemed she was also waiting for the continuation of the story she had started. On the fourth day, a message came. Emily wrote that she had talked to her family and was ready to meet. She wanted to do this gradually, without hurry, so everyone could get used to the new situation. Her adoptive parents reacted with understanding. Her husband supported her decision. On the appointed day, I arrived at the park an hour early. I sat on our bench, nervously petting Bella and watching every passerby. When I saw the familiar figure, my heart began beating so hard I feared for my health. Emily walked slowly, holding a folder with documents and several photographs. She looked calmer than a week ago, but I could see tension in her movements. Bella immediately ran to her, wagging her tail joyfully, as if meeting an old friend. Emily brought photos of her family, children's drawings by Alexander and Lily, even some certificates from the children's home that were kept by her adoptive parents. We sat on the same bench, and Bella lay nearby, satisfied with the reunion of the people she had brought together. Emily told me about the conversation with her family. James and Margaret reacted to the news with understanding, even rejoiced that she had found her biological mother. They had never hidden the fact of adoption and always said that if she wanted to find her birth family, they would support her. Her husband, David, also supported her desire to establish a relationship with me. He said he understood the importance of family connections and didn't see this as a threat to their marriage. On the contrary, he thought it would be beneficial for the children to learn more about their roots. The children received the news with childish curiosity. Alexander asked many questions about why his mom lived in a children's home, where her real mom had been all these years. Lily was more interested in practical questions. Could they visit Grandma? Did she have toys? Emily said the children wanted to meet their grandmother, and my heart skipped a beat. Grandmother. I was a grandmother. I had grandchildren I had never seen who didn't know of my existence. We agreed to meet once a week in the park until everyone got used to the new situation. Emily wanted to act carefully, not traumatize the children with sudden changes in their lives. I completely understood her and was ready for any conditions just to maintain this connection. A month later, Emily brought the children to the park. I was as nervous as if I were going to the most important job interview of my life. What if they didn't accept me? What if they got scared or didn't want to communicate? Alexander turned out to be a serious boy with dark hair and intelligent eyes, a copy of his father, but with Emily's facial features. He kept somewhat apart, studying me with an attentive gaze. He asked questions about where I lived, what I did, why I didn't have other children. Lily was the complete opposite of her brother. Lively, curious, fearlessly approached me and asked if she could pet Bella. When I said yes, she immediately sat on the grass next to the dog and began playing with her. Bella was delighted with the children. She patiently let Lily pet her, played ball with Alexander, which he had brought. Alexander said he had always wanted a dog, and Emily promised to seriously think about it. We spent several hours in the park. The children quickly got comfortable and began calling me Grandma Anne. Alexander showed me his collection of Pokemon cards, and Lily showed me a drawing she had made especially for me. It depicted our family: Mom, Dad, children, me, and Bella. Gradually, our meetings became regular. First, once a week in the park. Then Emily invited me to her home for Sunday lunch. Their house turned out to be a cozy 2-story building in a quiet neighborhood, with a large garden and swings for the children. David greeted me very warmly. He turned out to be exactly as I had imagined from Emily's stories: kind, gentle, and caring. Calm man with a good sense of humor. He accepted me as a family member without unnecessary questions and judgments, for which I was incredibly grateful. At lunch, we talked about simple things: work, weather, vacation plans. No one brought up painful topics from the past. The children talked about school, showed their toys, asked permission to feed Bella under the table. After lunch, Emily showed me around the house. The children's rooms were full of toys and books. Lily's drawings and Alexander's school awards hung on the walls. In Emily's bedroom, I saw an old stuffed rabbit with a worn pink bow on the shelf. Seeing the rabbit, I couldn't hold back tears. This was the very same bunny that little Sophia had loved, the only connection to her childhood that she had preserved through all these years. Emily hugged me and said she now understood why she had always treasured this toy. Emily's adoptive parents also wanted to meet me. I feared this meeting most of all. What would I say to the people who raised my daughter? How could I thank them for doing for her what I couldn't do? How could I apologize for appearing in their lives 30 years later? But James and Margaret turned out to be wonderful people. They invited me for dinner at their home, where Emily's childhood photos and school awards were still kept. They told me about how she grew up, what she was like as a child and teenager. Margaret showed me a photo album. Emily on her first day of school, in school plays, at graduation, at her wedding. All those moments I had missed were carefully preserved by these people. They gave my daughter the childhood I could only dream of. James said he didn't blame me for the decision to give up the child. On the contrary, he believed it required great courage to put the child's welfare above one's own feelings. Margaret added that Emily had told them about the situation I was in, and that I had saved her life by bringing her to them. They asked me not to feel guilty and not to try to take away their daughter from them. In their understanding, Emily now simply had more people who loved her. Family can expand, but shouldn't be destroyed because of jealousy or misunderstanding. Now, a year and a half after that fateful meeting, I had become part of a large, complex, but loving family. I had a daughter who called me by name, but with such warmth that it meant no less than the word Mom. I had a son-in-law who accepted me without questions. I had 2 grandchildren who eagerly awaited our meetings. I even had surrogate parents in James and Margaret who had become friends and support for me. We celebrated birthdays together, gathered on weekends, planned joint vacations. Emily joked that now her children had the biggest family in their class. Alexander and Lily called me Grandma Ann and treated me as a full family member. Alexander taught me to play video games and told me about his plans to become an engineer. Lily showed me her drawings and asked me to read her bedtime stories when I stayed overnight at their place. Bella became the favorite of the whole family. The children adored playing with her, and David often took her for morning runs. Emily said Bella had become not just a dog for their family, but a symbol of how fate can bring people together in the most unexpected ways. 6 months ago, they got their own puppy, a golden retriever named Charlie. When we visit or they come to us, Bella meets Charlie and treats him like a younger brother, patiently teaching him dog wisdom during our joint walks. Now, the children have 2 dogs to play with, and they can't get enough of such wealth. Charlie helps Bella stay active during our meetings. The young dog constantly invites her to play when we gather together, and she can't resist his enthusiasm. The children say Charlie is Bella's gift to the family, her way of making sure everyone has a friend to play with. Emily never started calling me Mom. For her, Mom is Margaret, the woman who raised her, was there through all difficult moments, celebrated all victories. But Emily calls me my person, or simply Anne. And in these words, there's so much warmth and acceptance, but I don't need anything more. Sometimes we talk about that past, about the difficult decision that changed both our lives. Emily thanks me for choosing her safety over my own desire to stay close. She understands that in that situation, I had no other choice and doesn't blame me for the years of separation. I told her how every year on her birthday, I would buy a cake and light candles, making a wish for her to be healthy and happy. How I imagined what she had become, what profession she chose, what her children looked like. Most of my assumptions turned out to be surprisingly accurate. We discovered many common traits. It turns out we both love old movies and can't stand horror films. We both prefer tea to coffee and can only fall asleep in complete silence. We have the same habits. We both fold clothes in a certain way and can't eat without making our plates perfectly clean. Alexander and Lily are delighted by these similarities. They constantly find new common traits between me and their mom, rejoicing at every coincidence. Lily says she now understands where Mom got the same eyes as hers. Sometimes I think about what would have happened if Bella hadn't broken free from my hands that October day. Would we have passed each other on the street without recognizing each other? Would I have continued living with the pain of loss, and Emily with questions about her origins? But fate decided otherwise. My unsociable, cautious dog somehow recognized my daughter in a crowd of strangers. Maybe it was the smell of childhood things she had sensed in the house for years. Maybe genetic similarity created similar pheromones. Or maybe it was simply a miracle. The veterinarian we consulted for an explanation said dogs really can associate scents with their owner's emotional state. Bella had sensed my sadness connected to the box of children's things for years. The smell of these things became a signal to her about something very important to me. When she met Emily, something in her scent, perhaps remnants of that childhood aroma, perhaps genetic similarity, seemed familiar. Instinct told Bella this woman was connected to the source of my long-standing grief. But however we explain Bella's behavior, the main thing is that she was able to do what all social services, detectives, and internet search engines in the world couldn't do. She returned to me the daughter I thought was lost forever. Last week, Lily drew a new picture of our family. It shows everyone: Emily with David, Alexander, herself, James with Margaret, me, Bella, and the new puppy Charlie. In the center of the drawing is a big house with many windows, and above it, a rainbow. Lily explained that Bella is the most important in the picture because she found Grandma Anne and brought the whole family together. And the rainbow means everyone has a happy life now. And she's right. Without Bella, this reunion would never have happened. My unsociable, traumatized shelter dog turned out to be a bridge between past and future, between loss and finding, between pain and healing. Now, when we walk the same route in downtown Portland, Bella walks calmly beside me. She has completed her main mission in life, led me to the person I'd been looking for 30 years. But sometimes I notice how she sniffs passers-by with that same attentive expression, and I wonder, are there other families waiting for reunion? Emily often says she doesn't believe in fate or higher powers. But in our case, it's hard to find a rational explanation. Out of millions of people in the city, Bella chose exactly her on that specific day, at that specific time, in that specific place. If I had left home half an hour earlier or later, if I had chosen a different route, if Emily hadn't stopped at exactly that cafe, we would never have met. Sometimes, lying in bed before sleep, I replay the entire chain of events in my head. What if I hadn't adopted Bella from the shelter 3 years ago? What if I had chosen a different dog, more social and friendly? What if that day I had decided to order food online instead of going to the store? Each of these decisions could have changed the course of events, but all the stars aligned exactly as they needed to. Two lost souls, Bella and I, found each other at the shelter. Bella spent 3 years absorbing the scent of my memories and pain. And then she led me to the third lost soul, my daughter, who had grown up happy but always wondered about her origins. Last summer, our whole family went to the ocean. We rented a big house in Cannon Beach for a week. It was amazing to watch how naturally everyone interacted with each other. James taught Alexander to fly a kite. Margaret and Emily cooked dinner together, laughing about some women's secrets. David and I built sandcastles with Lily. Bella and Charlie ran along the beach, chasing seagulls and waves during our daily walks. Lily shouted after them, demanding they not run too far. Alexander photographed everything with his new camera, a birthday gift. In the evening, we sat on the porch, watching the sunset. Children fell asleep in our laps. Dogs settled by the fireplace. Emily quietly said she never thought she could have such a big family, that she had always dreamed of numerous relatives, but couldn't imagine how it could happen. Margaret noted that families are created not only by blood ties. Sometimes people find each other after years of separation. Sometimes complete strangers become closer than relatives. The main thing is the desire to be together and readiness to accept each other as we are. That evening, I felt I had finally come home, not in a geographical sense, but emotionally. For 30 years, I had lived with a feeling of incompleteness, with the pain of loss, with guilt about the decision I made. Now, I knew I had done the right thing and could forgive myself. This fall, Alexander will go to middle school. He's seriously into programming and dreams of creating his own computer game. Lily started taking dance and art classes. She says she wants to become an artist and paint portraits of our whole family. Emily got promoted at work and now heads an entire department. David wrote an article about pediatric cardiac surgery that was published in a medical journal. James retired and took up gardening. Margaret became a volunteer at the local library. And I enrolled in Italian language courses and planned to go to Tuscany next summer, a long-held dream I had postponed for years. Emily says the children want to come with me to practice the language. The thought of traveling with my grandchildren seems incredibly exciting. Bella is aging. She's already 9 years old, and sometimes I notice how she gets tired during long walks. The vet says everything's fine with her, but we need to watch the exercise. I know we don't have that much time left together, and I try to treasure every day. Charlie helps Bella stay active during our meetings. The young dog constantly invites her to play when we gather together, and she can't resist his enthusiasm. The children say Charlie is Bella's gift to the family, her way of making sure someone will take care of everyone after her. Sometimes I sit in Emily's garden, watching the children and dogs play, how Emily waters flowers, how David reads medical journals in the shade of the apple tree. In such moments, it seems I've entered someone else's life where everything worked out perfectly. But then I remember the long path that brought us all here. My youth, full of mistakes and difficult decisions. Years of loneliness and self-reproach. Emily growing up in a stranger's family with questions about her past. Bella, abandoned and frightened, searching for home and safety. We all went through pain, loss, disappointment. But it was exactly this experience that made us who we are. It taught us to value what we have and not take happiness for granted. It showed us that family is not only blood ties, but also a choice we make every day. For Emily's birthday this year, Lily gave her a handmade book called Our Family Story. Each page had a drawing with a caption. Mom in the children's home. Grandma Ann sad without Mom. Bella looking for Mom for Grandma Ann. Bella finds Mom. Everyone happy. At the end of the book was a page labeled What Happens Next. The drawing showed all of us standing in front of a big house with many rooms. Lily explained that when she grows up, she'll buy a huge house where all our family members can live. And lots of dogs and cats and maybe horses. Emily cried, leafing through this book. Then she hugged her daughter and said it was the best gift of her life. That now she had not only present and future, but also a past that no longer caused pain. I keep a copy of this book at home, on a shelf next to the box of Sophia's childhood things. Sometimes I flip through it and marvel at how a 4-year-old child could so accurately convey the essence of our story. Pain, search, meeting, healing, new beginning. Recently, I met a woman with a dog in the park who told a similar story. She too had given up a child for adoption many years ago and dreams of meeting him. I told her our story, and she listened with bated breath. Then she asked if my Bella could help her find her son too. I smiled and explained that miracles can't be ordered. But I advised her not to lose hope and be open to unexpected turns of fate. Sometimes what we're looking for finds us. Now, as I write this story, Bella lies at my feet. She's aging. Her fur is graying. Her movements becoming slower. But her eyes are still the same. Intelligent, attentive, full of love. From time to time, she lifts her head and looks at me, as if checking that everything's okay. I stroke her head and whisper thank you. Thank you for finding me at the shelter when I was lonely. Thank you for sharing years of sorrow and joy with me. Thank you for leading me to my daughter. Thank you for giving me a family I didn't dare dream of. Bella looks at me with her wise eyes, and I'm sure she understands every word. She knows she changed not only my life, but the lives of many people. Emily now knows her story. Alexander and Lily gained a grandmother. James and Margaret got another daughter. David became part of a big family. We all became richer, not materially, but emotionally. We gained new connections, new traditions, new memories. Holidays became more fun, weekdays warmer, the future brighter. And all this thanks to one dog who somehow sensed a connection between two people in a crowd of strangers. A dog who refused to give up when logic suggested there could be nothing in common between us. Maybe dogs really do see what's inaccessible to human understanding. Maybe they sense energy connections, genetic codes, emotional fields. Or maybe Bella was simply an instrument of fate, which decided that 30 years of separation was enough. However it was, I'm grateful for every day we spent together. Bella gave me much more than I ever gave her. She taught me to believe in miracles, not give up in difficult situations, be open to unexpected turns in life. She showed me that love has no expiration date, that family bonds aren't broken by time and distance, that sometimes the most important meetings happen on the most ordinary day when you least expect them. My story ended happily, but it might never have begun if not for one amazing dog who decided it was time to reunite a family. Bella didn't just find my daughter. She restored my faith that what's lost can be found, what's broken can be healed, and love always finds its way home. Now we have a future we'll build together, step by step, day by day, with patience and love. And Bella will be with us until fate decides otherwise. And when her time comes, we'll remember her as our family's guardian angel, as a bridge between past and future, as proof that miracles happen to those ready to accept them.